Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk to you about a powerful, life-changing phrase, God's got this. We all face challenges, obstacles that seem insurmountable. It's easy to live uptight, wondering how things will work out. What if the medical report isn't good? What if our finances don't improve? What if our dreams remain unfulfilled? We try to figure it all out, but despite our best efforts, nothing seems to change. If we're not careful, we'll live worried, discouraged, and without hope. But there's a simple, transformative phrase that we must keep in our spirit. God's got this. He is on the throne, He sees our struggles, and He already has the solution. We don't need to figure it all out. There may not be a logical answer, and in the natural we might not see a way forward. But that's okay, because we serve a supernatural God. He has ways of making things happen that we could never imagine. Instead of trying to force it, living uptight, we need to let go and let God. When we turn it over to Him and say, God, I know you've got this, I know you're in control, not only will we feel the heaviness lift off of us, but God will make things happen that we couldn't make happen on our own. The things that are frustrating us now, causing us to lose sleep, will all change when we adopt this new perspective that God's got this. Sometimes we try to play God. We try to force our boss to promote us, make ourselves get well, or ensure the contract goes through. But as long as we're trying to force it, living frustrated and worried, God steps back. When we take our hands off and say, God, I know you've got this, I'm not going to worry about my finances, my health, or my relationships, I trust your timing and your ways, God takes over. He never promised that we wouldn't face difficulties, but He did promise to give us strength for every battle and to turn what was meant for harm into our advantage. You may have a good reason to worry about your health, finances, or dreams. You've done everything you can and it doesn't look like it's going to work out. Stay in faith. God is saying, I've got this, I'm working behind the scenes, turning it around. It's just a matter of time before things change in your favor. Live from a place of peace and trust. It may not happen the way you thought, but God's ways are better than ours. He knows what's best for us. He's got this. In the scriptures, Daniel worked for King Darius, who loved him and planned to put him in charge of the whole empire. When the other leaders heard this, they were jealous and devised a plan to get rid of Daniel. When you excel and your gifts shine brightly, don't be surprised if people get jealous. Not everyone will celebrate your success. Some will try to hold you back. But the good news is that people don't determine your destiny. God does. Keep being your best and let God fight your battles. Don't get distracted trying to prove yourself to others. Let God be your vindicator. These leaders manipulated the king into signing a decree that anyone who prayed to any god other than the king would be thrown into the lion's den. They knew Daniel prayed to Jehovah. Despite the decree, Daniel continued his routine of praying to God. When the leaders reported him, the king was distressed, realizing he had been manipulated, but he couldn't revoke his decree. So Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. That night the king fasted for Daniel. When you're in difficult situations, God has people praying for you that you don't even know about. This king, who was supposed to be Daniel's enemy, was actually praying for his safety. When they arrested Daniel and took him to the lion's den, he wasn't afraid, worried, or panicked. He understood this principle. God's got this. He had seen his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survive a fiery furnace without even the smell of smoke. Daniel's attitude was, I'm in the palm of God's hand. Nothing can snatch me away. If it's not my time to go, I'm not going to go. The Apostle Paul said, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. He was saying, if I live, I'm going to give God praise. If I die, I'm going to give God praise. Either way, he stayed in faith, knowing that God's got this. What you're facing may be bigger, stronger, and more powerful. But when you refuse to worry, refuse to live stressed out, and instead stay in peace, thanking God that he's fighting your battles and is in control, you're showing by your actions that you're trusting him. One evening, the authorities threw Daniel into the lion's den, expecting him to be eaten within minutes. These were hungry lions, but God supernaturally closed their mouths. For some reason, they weren't hungry that night. God knows how to make you unappetizing to the enemy. What should normally defeat you can't harm you. It can't stop your business or take your health. God has put a bloodline around you and your family. He controls the universe, the lions, and the enemies. You're not at the mercy of random events or bad breaks. God has a hedge of protection around you. Nothing can happen without his permission. That's why we don't have to live worried or uptight. We're in a controlled environment. When the Hebrew teenagers were about to be thrown into the fiery furnace, they said, "We know our God will deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we won't bow down." They weren't panicked, upset, or bitter. They knew they were in a controlled environment. They were saying, if we live, we'll give God praise. If we don't, we'll go to heaven and still give God praise. They stayed in faith, knowing that God has the final say. In the lion's den that night, Daniel wasn't uptight or on edge. He stayed in peace. Animals can sense when you're afraid, but when you're calm and confident, they know you're the authority. When you face enemies in life, whether it's sickness, addiction, or debt, those enemies can sense when you're afraid of them. They'll take more ground. That's why Scripture says, "Give no place to the enemy." But when they see you standing strong, thanking God when you could be complaining, being good to people when you could be bitter, and staying at peace when you could be panicked, you're sending a message to those enemies that they have no power over you. Daniel found a nice piece of grass, laid down, and fell asleep. Early the next morning, the king came running to the lion's den and called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was the God you constantly worship able to save you?" The king was acknowledging that Daniel served a different God, yet he knew something was different about him. When Daniel came walking toward him, unharmed, passing the lions, the king was overjoyed. Not a scratch was found on Daniel because he trusted in his God. Amazing things happen when you stay in faith and trust God. God not only protected Daniel, but the king ordered the men who conspired against him to be thrown into the same lion's den, and they didn't have the same outcome. The king issued a new decree that everyone in his kingdom should worship the God of Daniel. He rescues his people. He's the living God. God doesn't deliver us from every difficulty. Most of the time, he takes us through the difficulty. Daniel's faith didn't keep him out of the lion's den, but his faith made him lion-proof. That's what brought him out of the den. If Daniel and the Hebrew teenagers had been worried, panicked, or negative, maybe there would have been a different outcome. Maybe we wouldn't be talking about them today. I urge you to quit worrying about what you're facing. Quit losing sleep over that child that's not doing right. Quit being upset because someone did you wrong or your dream hasn't come to pass yet. God's got this. Like he did for Daniel, he's going to make a way where you don't see a way. Like he did for the Hebrew teenagers, he's going to protect you, favor you, and get you to where you're supposed to be. David said, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." God is not just with you on the mountaintops. He's with you in the valleys. He knows what you're up against. Scripture says God is concerned about what concerns you. A sparrow doesn't fall to the ground without God knowing about it. How much more is he concerned about what's happening in your life? Trust him. Live from a place of peace. Every day there's something to worry about, some reason to get upset. All through the day, keep this phrase close to your heart. God's got this. He's concerned about you. He's working in your life. He's bigger than your enemies. He's lining up the right people. He's arranging things in your favor. That attitude of faith allows God to do amazing things. We all face situations that are bigger than us. A bad medical report, a lost client, trouble in a relationship. It's easy to think of all the reasons why it won't work out. But that's when you have to dig your heels in and switch over into faith. No, God, I know you've got this. Thank you for protecting my children. Thank you for fighting my battles. Thank you for healing my body. When you're tempted to worry, turn it around and thank God that He's working. Daniel could have said, God, I was doing the right thing. Why did you let this happen? Instead, he stayed in faith. God, I know you've got this. You're in control. You'll protect me. When you believe, all things are possible. Faith activates God's power. God is asking us to trust Him when it doesn't make sense, to believe when we don't see a way, and to stay in peace when everything in us says to panic. God's got this. Imagine Daniel's night in the lion's den. Every time a lion yawned, he probably saw huge teeth. He could have been frightened, but instead he went to sleep trusting God. The next morning the king saw God's power on display. Because of Daniel's faith, the entire nation heard about the greatness of God. Your faith can inspire others. When you stay calm in adversity, when you have a good attitude despite challenges, people will notice. Your faith can open doors for others to believe. So as you face your own lion's den, remember, God's got this. He'll bring you out better than you were before. He'll take what was meant for harm and use it to your advantage. Trust Him, stay in faith, and you'll see His goodness in ways you never imagined.